Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago, and welcome to PSA TV. This is Questions with Avellon. We have in studio with us this morning, he's a political stalwart in the House this morning with us. He's been the mayor of Port of Spain. He's also owned his own media house, and now he's actually going into politics to be the next Prime Minister of this country. I want to introduce to you Mr. Louis Leasing in studio with us this morning. Good morning, Mr. Leasing.
Good morning. Avellon, I don't know about Prime Minister. That's a long way off. But we are certainly contesting for Port of Spain in the coming local government election. As you know, the party is the Port of Spain People's Movement, and it is made up of people who really want to see a change after 60 years. There has been one political organization administering over the affairs of the city of Port of Spain, unbroken for 60 plus years. As you walk the streets and you walk the alleys and the tracks, particularly on the periphery of the city, there's a strong feeling that the people in these communities have been forgotten. If you walk Port of Spain, central business district, and you see the state of it, you want to believe that there is no city corporation in Port of Spain. We'd like to fix that.
Right. Mr. Leasing, what do you consider as your greatest achievement when you served as mayor of Port of Spain?
Well, that's a long list.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that stand out and people speak to me about all the time is the issue of the re-engineering of King George V Park. When I got to local government in 2010, I met a file this high in the mayor's office. Right. With people who had taken lawsuits or who were complaining of one kind or another about King George V Park. We had a case where a young woman was walking through the park on a Juve morning at 4 o'clock in the morning and fell into a hole and was injured. She sued the city. We had another situation where a boy went into one of the holes that were left uncovered and couldn't get out and had to be rescued. They also sued the city. And the list went on and on. We took a decision that we had to fix that park, and today it is what it is. What troubles me a whole heap is that today people, the current mayor and the current council, are in fact engaging in parking in the park, which was something that by resolution we had indicated that there would be no parking in the park, and therefore the appropriate signs are up.
Right.
If today the city corporation is allowing people to park, it is in violation of that. And I don't know that they would have changed the bylaws in that matter. But it tells you people who didn't have to work for something, they often don't appreciate it. And the current council certainly is a group of people who do not understand that King George V Park, like the Savannah, ought to be sacred ground. There aren't too many green spaces in those neighborhoods, you know, and so that troubles me. In terms of other areas of development, we certainly were able to establish law and order, certainly with the reckless parking. When we came to office, people would park these huge SUVs and pickup trucks on the pavements. That became a thing of the past. People blocked people in front locked people in their homes by parking in front of their driveways. I had calls in the wee hours of the morning, people wanting to get out of their homes to go to the hospital, for example, and couldn't do that because somebody had blocked them in. People parked near the corners, near the hydrants. All of these things, we established law and order by enforcing the law. We didn't, as it were, have any dislike for any individual. We had to enforce the law, and we did that with a passion. The issue of the organization and regulation of vending in the city, a lot of work had gone into it, but before it could have been implemented in a holistic way, I had left office, and I guess my having left office, the fellows who followed me didn't feel that they had any anxiety to do the things that I had been pursuing, not because they weren't good pursuits, but largely because of the narrow-mindedness and the pettiness of the political direction of their particular party. When we look back, we see that we had institutionalized training for staffers. And so the surpluses that had been generated from the wrecking program, because you had to pay the owners of the wrecker, operators of the wrecker, the surpluses that had been generated, that had been largely used to train the employees in the Port of Spain Corporation. I don't know that that is now being done. And training is something that if it's not consistent and regulated, soon people forget the reason why they're trained. That was a situation I met. Nobody had been trained in a lifetime or retrained. And so we started that process. I am sure the employees of the corporation missed that opportunity for self-development. Looking back on it, we took particular care to focus on our parks and squares and to ensure that they were well manicured, well kept. And we did what we had to do to encourage the use of the parks and squares, whether it be for poetry and art and drama and what have you. And we did have some people starting to do that. We couldn't, as it were, accelerate that program having left office. The issue of the street dwellers, which is something often misunderstood, and there are many people peddling wrong information about it. For example, some character met me recently and was saying to me that I sent people to Transform Life Ministries. I did no such thing. I sent nobody anywhere. What we did when we took up we did 4 exercises, and when we picked up the street dwellers for loitering, we were duty bound to take them to court. Our process was that when we took them off the streets, we took them to the Salvation Army where they were showered and cleaned and what have you. And then the following day we took them to court. It was the magistrate's responsibility, upon hearing the evidence brought before him or her, to do and to direct as was necessary. I don't know in the history of it that any of the magistrates directed that people be taken to Transform Ministries. What I do know, however, and the first time I heard about Transform Ministries was when I sat at a roundtable discussion under the chairmanship of the then Minister of Social Development, Dr. Glenn Ramadasingh. And I sat next to Pastor Awan, and I heard him speak about what he was doing. And because of my own curiosity, I did inquire whether he would facilitate my visiting with him. When I visited with him, I did not see any cages. I did not see anybody locked up in cages. But as to whether I sent anyone to Transform Ministries, I couldn't do that. I didn't have the authority or the office. May I also point out that what was startling during those exercises, after the 4 exercises, we were able to discern that of the people who we took off the streets, 70% of them were drug addicts. In fact, when we picked them up, many of them had smoking implements, and some of them had crack and cocaine on them and things like that. Some had weapons. Then we also had the second largest group were the mentally ill people, whom we would have treated, because part of our teams that went out, we had mental health practitioners with us. And it was something that you could marvel at, because they knew the street dwellers by names, and so they would give them their medication there and then. So we never really took to court the mentally ill, because they would have been administered with medication, and then they were able to go on home. Once they became conscious that they are in the wrong place, they went back home. The third group was deportees, and the last group were people who simply fell through the cracks. As I look back on that exercise, I know now that the whole question of street dwelling can be fixed, which is to say, people who have fallen through the cracks, if a state such as ours can't take care of that group, which is very small, we should shut down our social services ministry. The second group, the deportees, we merely have to work with the likes of Vision and Mission with Wayne Chansonday and fix that. With respect to the mental health people, we have to change the way we treat with our mental health services, which is to say, those people who are on the streets aren't going to get up and go to a clinic, wherever that clinic is. And so that clinic has to come to that person wherever he or she resides. And if we do that in a systematic and organized way, those are three groups off the street. The last group, and perhaps the most difficult group, would be the drug addicts. And my own feeling is that if we bring drug addicts before the courts on 3 occasions, the laws should be there to say that the magistrate can say mandatory drug rehabilitation. I think a society and a country has a responsibility to look after its most vulnerable. And these 3 categories, the drug addicts, the mental health, and the deportees, are people whom we have a responsibility to look after and to assist and to ensure that they do not find themselves on the streets. If we do that, street dwelling is no more. But I guess for successive administrations, that is a nightmare. That is a difficult assignment. That is such an easy assignment. One wonders whether somebody is not making a killing by having the street dwellers on the pavements.
Mr. Lee, saying one of the major issues in Port of Spain when it rains, City Gate is flooding. What did you put in place to stop this situation? Because it seemed to be an ongoing process.
Well, it's not only City Gate. When I came to office, I think the July, and by the October, I think it was October 10th, there was a major flood in the city. So much so that the East Dry River broke its banks. It had that long, hard shower. And all the apartments in St. Joseph Road, the water was almost near the top of their windows on the ground floor. When we got there and I saw the disaster, I made a call that all the residents be relocated, and they were all relocated. But I also made a call to the erstwhile Jack Warner, because Mr. Warner is a special person. And I always reflect on how supportive he was of my efforts as mayor, because we looked at what we could do, and he was able to, with his engineers, they came up with a plan to create a detention pond on South Quay. It is still there with the appropriate pump, so that water naturally flowed into that detention pond. And when the waters would have subsided and the tide was down, the water was pumped out into the drains. That worked in that area, so much so that I don't know that we have ever had that kind of flooding in that community. That's to the east of the city. To the west of the city, Princess Elizabeth Home and Goodwill Industries, these are places where we have children who are challenged. And so they would flood all the time, every day. And again, with our team, we were able to put in sluice gates and clear the drains and insulate these properties from flooding. They haven't flooded since then. We were able to go to Ryson Road, where there's a major drain, crossing the Ryson Road and going into the swamp down there near Movie Town. We were able to clear those drains and begin the process of reducing flooding in key parts of Woodbrook. So that if we deal with Port of Spain, many of the drains under the Independence Square and what have you are really no longer useful. Many of them are totally clogged and concretized. And so the question is, what do we do?
Yep.
We had a situation where Port of Spain is below sea level, And if it rains for 40 minutes consistently and the tide is high, you will get flood. I note now, whether the tide is high or low, we are getting flood once there's 40 minutes of rain.
Yeah.
And it simply means that those drains must be cleared. I recall one of the projects that had been thought of when I was at City Hall was that they wanted to excavate an entire street. I think they were talking about Frederick Street at the time. But I was able to point out with my engineering team that the lowest street in Port of Spain is St. Vincent Street. And so the idea was that we would excavate St. Vincent Street, create like a dry river underneath the street, you follow? So that huge volumes of water would have been able to hit to the sea much faster and thereby alleviate much of the water on the surface. I did ask as mayor for one thing. I said, well, if we're doing that, let us use the opportunity to begin the process to put all our cables and electric wires underground. And they told me that that was not part of the remit. I said, yeah, but if we are going to go to this extent, now is the time for us to do that, because it merely means creating the conduit, a channel where we would put all these wires inside and thereby save a lot of digging up of the road. Well, I don't know what happened with that, but I guess I can surmise that the country became a poorer country, and therefore it is now incapable of doing the things that matter most. So we dealt with flooding. But during that time, I hosted a symposium on the development of Port of Spain, and I did, in fact, I was given the support of the Dutch government. And as you know, the Dutch are very familiar with water and water levees because of their own situation being on the sea. And they don't have floods because they have come to understand how to regulate and to manage water. Trinidadians and this country, for the like of me, will not do what is right. We will not invest in the things that ought to be priority items, but we rather take limited resources and build roads from Valencia to Toco, put down a port, which at this time nobody has illustrated to me what are the likely return on investment, whether there's going to be a foreign exchange benefit by way of it being an earner. I hear people say to me that, well, rather than have people go all the way around the island to go to Tobago, it's a straight line and people will go. All of that is good and it's nice, it sounds nice. But if we can't manage this sea bridge here, which we've been doing for the last 60 years, how are we going to manage 2 sea bridges? Or is it that everybody who's going to go to Tobago will now be forced to drive to Toco and get over? And so I begin to ask the questions. Who is really benefiting from this yet another excursion into expenditure? My fears are that we're not taking the capital city of Port of Spain seriously. And therefore, the things that matter most are always being at the expense of things that matter least.
Mr. Leesing, how do you feel when you look back at what's happening now,
Well, you feel sad as someone who loves the country, but as someone who loves Port of Spain just as much. You feel very sad, and you ask yourself, if it is so bad now, and I am at the point where I have granddaughters, what will my granddaughters experience when they reach the age of 21? I don't know, and it frightens me. I wish I could see something with a glimmer of hope. If I were in Guyana today, I would not be as worried, because I know with all the windfalls that are coming the way of Guyana, they will not and ought not to make the mistakes that we have made. But when I look at Jamaica, who is after 39 long years in the wilderness, it's almost as if it is in the Bible, you know, the 40 days, the 400, I can't remember, it's 40 years they were in the wilderness. So it's 40 years now, and they're now climbing out of their crises, monetary and financial crises. Is that what is in store for my granddaughters and the granddaughters and grandsons of everyone in this country? I think that is something that ought not to be, because whether we like it or not, there's a huge group of Trinidadians who have worked real hard, you know, whether it's in the public service, whether it's in the teaching profession, whether it's in merely working at offices or in transport or operating their maxi taxis or their taxis. You know, the list is long. And so people deserve a better life in Trinidad as we speak. But that life has not come, and that is unfortunate. And I am very unforgiving in that regard, particularly to those politicians who have caused us to be in this crisis that we're in.
When you look at the current mayor, Mr. Joel Martinez, do you think that there is more he should be doing?
I choose not to comment on the work of Mr. Martinez.
Okay.
If Mr. Martinez has done work in the last 3 or 4 years, Port of Spain will feel it. And therefore, I leave it that way.
Thank you. Ms. Ali, saying being this standing stalwart in the PNM for so many years, what was your major reason for leaving the PNM?
I tell this story so often, particularly these days, it troubles me that the question is still being asked. But let me put it succinctly. I left the PNM because I was asked to offer myself as a candidate in the constituency of Port of Spain South. I got the majority of party groups to nominate me. And I went for screening. In fact, I have documented all of this in my second book, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters.
Nice.
And in that book, I told my granddaughters of my being screened in the People's National Movement and all the dynamics associated with it. Prior to my screening, I had someone placed in my mailbox a file which contained all the relevant documents of the wrongdoing, the alleged wrongdoings of the incumbent in Port of Spain South. When I saw that, I thought it was my responsibility as a senior party member to make it available to the political leader, to the chairman of the party, who was then Franklin Kahn, to the general secretary, who was then Ashton Ford, and I think to Jennifer Baptiste Primus, whom I had a personal relationship with. That having been done, it was my expectant hope that the party would investigate it further and look at the details, because it was very explicit. You saw the approval on the letters written by some people to her. You saw where the approvals were given. You saw the checks that were paid, the return checks. You saw the dates when the checks were paid. You saw the schedule of the payments. And it not only dealt with that, it dealt with a missing community center and so on and so forth. No such thing was done. Yet, on the night of the screening, I walked with a plan, a case for representation for Port of Spain South. The plan essentially spoke about how I would represent the people and how I would be a good member of parliament for this party that I was a member of for 46 years. I was not allowed to present my plan, and I got the distinct impression that the screening committee was really laughing at me. I left there knowing that I would not be selected, and therefore, sometime an hour or two later, they announced that the current incumbent, who was the then incumbent, was the choice of the party. Well, you know, the old people have a saying, God don't sleep.
Correct.
And what has transpired thereafter is an indication of that screening process, which was chaired by the political leader of the party, which was made up of senior officers of that party, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Labor, and the list goes on. It troubled me a whole heap that is what Dr. Williams's party had been reduced to. And some argue that I should have stayed and continued to fight from within. But there's this weakness in my character, which is to say that I cannot accept that level of dishonesty. I cannot accept that level of lack of transparency. I cannot accept that level of lack of accountability. And I knew that I couldn't remain in that environment because it was unhealthy. There was nothing noble about it. It was dishonest. It reeked of incompetence in leadership. And therefore, I felt it is better that I leave that space and allow it to find its way, and I find my way. Well, I didn't know that I would be back in this kind of thing. But when people keep gnawing at you and asking you the same question over and over, you begin to engage them in conversation. And one conversation leads to another, and you begin to have meetings and so on and so forth. And eventually, you find yourself doing a different kind of role, but for the same purpose. Ours is a noble cause. Ours is one intended to bring good governance to the city of Port of Spain. Ours is intended to lift Port of Spain and make it smile again. The tagline of the party at this time is the Port of Spain People's Movement, creating a humane capital city. What does that tagline suggest? It suggests that there's nothing humane about the capital these days. Everything seems to have become corroded and eroded. And in so many ways, more than one, we do not have a society in the city of Port of Spain, which is our focus,
Right.
that treats with all its burgesses with equity, with understanding, with concern, with compassion. We do not put people first in Port of Spain. Too many things go on, and there's no consultation. I recall, under my watch as mayor, I had 24 town meetings. I was at council for 39 months. So if you take away months for Christmas and Diwali and Carnival, it's about a meeting a month. And at those meetings, we listened to the concerns of the burgesses of the district. We took action that could have been taken right there and then, because at these meetings, we took the chief executive officer, superintendent of police, the building inspector, the doctor, the health inspector, and so on and so forth. So that matters that could have been addressed, we will address them immediately. And I took copious notes, and I would follow up with the CEO on a consistent basis to ensure that we had a better city.
Mr. Lee Singh, some people took to social media with the disapproval of the new signage, Chinatown, located on Charlotte Street. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that I think people need to begin to think things out a little better. It is not that the mayor has done anything wrong, particularly when I read his release and his rationale for it. He sees it as creating a business center with a certain kind of dynamic and chemistry.
Right.
And he is doing that on the basis that historically there was a time when Charlotte Street, there was a dominance in terms of restaurants and businesses and supermarkets and what have you. Now,
That's okay.
what we have there is that we have a situation where we are doing things piecemeal. one of the policies of one of the points in our plan for the local government election is that there will be a comprehensive review to address the whole issue of names of places and streets within the city. So that the focus is on Chinatown and Charlotte Street. Some people have said to me, they should have named that African Town. Well, I recall when I was at City Hall, I did ask the Emancipation Support Committee through Pearl 𝒂𝒂 to do the research in East Port-of-Spain, because when the African slaves came off the plantations, they really settled in East Port-of-Spain into the Laventille Hills. But yet not a street in that community is named for Africans or African slaves or heroes or whatever. And I can't believe that to be true. Now, it might have been that when they got there, they didn't have their Africanness and names because they would have been stripped of all of that. But the research must be able to reflect a better understanding, and therefore you could take an informed position. I think even as we seek to change names, and the names that have been changed in recent times were changed by Mayor Tim Key, who seemed to have a love for changing names. He changed King George V Park to Mandela Park, and he changed Queen Street. He added 𝒊𝒏𝒈 Commission Queen Street. And maybe he had a logic and a wisdom behind that. But my own feeling, I would want any such assignment to be certainly well thought out, evaluated, reviewed. The history must inform these things. Why are we doing these things? You know, like I understood last week, UDCUT was trying to dismantle the RAF headquarters on Queen's Park East. Now that is a landmark property that has tremendous significance, particularly for people like deceased Ulrich Cross and others who would have served in the RAF, that's the Royal Air Force, and who made tremendous contributions, and they're all part of that. One of the things I tried to get established under my term was a listing of all the men who served overseas but represented Trinidad and Tobago in all these wars, who, you know, so that we can put their names down and people could know who they were and things like that. Most countries do that for people who have contributed. Strangely enough, in Trinidad, they have a tendency to want to stand on you and dismantle you.
That's true.
You know, in Trinidad, no good deed goes unpunished.
That's true.
Yeah? It's not a place that is rewarding. It's not. The reality is this, that maybe it is because there are no sanctions in this place and there are only awards. Everybody gets an award. If you do what you're supposed to do, you see a blind man need to cross the road and you walk him across the road, they will give you a national award. You're supposed to do that. The things that we are supposed to do, we consistently get awards. Somebody rescue somebody from a fire, particularly a fireman, they give him an award. That is his job. What I would say to them, however, you give him a citation from the fire service. But I don't know that he should be given a national award. The national awards in this country have been, it is almost as if they have belittled the concept of a national award. People get awards for just doing nothing. And maybe that's the way this society is.
Mr. Lee, how would you explain the political landscape right now in this country?
It's a minefield. What we have two voting machines, the red and the yellow. But I think there is a tremendous position, and it is a growing position by many, that they want neither the red nor the yellow.
Right.
And Therefore, the question is, who will come with such magic? Who will come with the right clothing, the right colors, the right armory, the right team that will sweep the red and the yellow aside and offer the whole country, including those people who are in the red and the yellow, an opportunity to do right by all manner of men. Trinidad cannot continue to follow the red and the yellow. At this time, maybe, I don't know, in 20 years' time, there might be a re-engineering of these organizations.
Maybe.
And maybe 20 years from now, they may be fit and proper. But as we speak, both the red and the yellow, there's an absence of creativity, innovativeness, there's an absence of dynamism. It is really two political institutions that have imprisoned the minds and bodies and spirits of a fair percentage of the population. When I was a youth in the PNM, and I got in there at 14 years. I was on the General Council at 16 years. I was suspended from the PNM in the 70s because people felt that I was subverting the party. I had a youth group in Barataria called 𝒊𝒏𝒈, which was a combination of Barataria and Malik. We were very active. We organized sports. We had lecture programs. In fact, that is where I met Patrick Chokolingo for the first time. I invited him to speak on the role and the development of the bomb. And after that, he would propose to me, why did I not come and join him? Because he felt I could do a job as a journalist. And so when you look at what we were doing, was really what I would wish all the young people who are involved in gangs are doing now. What people involved in gangs, I wish they were doing what we were doing then. Because in a sense, we influenced change. It might have been small, but we influenced it. When we had a sports meeting in Malik, people came from all over, as far as Success Village in Laventille, as far as Mount Hope in the east. We really had a sports meeting. And so the question is, why did I get into trouble with the PNM? We had a publication, The Voice of 𝒊𝒏𝒈, which I edited. And in it, we had headlines like, water, water anywhere. That's the first time I saw the article, that kind of article being written. But that is in 69, 70. So you understand that water has always been a crisis in this country. Drifted politically for a while. It was during that period that I became a good friend of Liebherr. And I felt at that time that what the Tapia House presented was superior to what the other parties represented. But as you know, Tapia was not something that anybody took seriously. It is almost like now, where people were only seeing with blinkers, the red and the yellow. But the yellow was in different incarnations at that time. It was the ULF and so on and so forth. So, that having been said, I'm saying to you, what is going on with the PNM today is nothing that is not part of its psyche. It has always been vicious and harsh to anyone within its ranks who is critical of the party. Because in being critical of the party, they conclude you're being critical of the leader. And that is unfortunate. So there's no politics in either of those parties. And that is why we are in the mess that we're in today.
Mr. Lee, we have our phone lines going to be opening, and I also want to take some questions that persons have been sending in if you feel to answer for them. This one is coming from Mr. Matthew Alexander. He is saying, Mr. Lee Singh, having supported Dr. Rowley to lead the PNM following the defeat of 2010, how would you rate his leadership of the party and by extension Trinidad and Tobago?
I think Dr. Rowleys' leadership is self-evident. I don't have to pronounce on that. I think this country has made up its mind about the value of Dr. Rowley to the politics of the country.
Okay, I hope that answers his question. We have Mr. Boxer, but I think he's referring to the statement you made regarding your grandchildren's future. I'm really concerned about great statements, but yeah, I don't know where he's going with that. We're going to take a short break and come right back. Our phone lines will be open, and also you could keep sending in your messages. Mr. Lee Singwell is going to be right here to respond to each and every question this morning. Good morning and welcome back to PSA TV. We've been chatting here with former Mayor Mr. Louis Leasing. Mr. Leasing, as we took that break, I just wanted to ask you another question. I know our phone line is going to be open as well to take your call so that Mr. Leasing can answer them. Your daughter-in-law, Laura Leasing, she's the public relations officer for the PNM. Has this affected you? Has this affected your relationship? I mean, how do you handle this at family gathering?
Well, again, I reference, I used to live in heaven letters to my granddaughters, because I've written fairly extensively about that. But I think I'm given to putting things into compartments, and I won't allow her political affiliations to impact in any way negatively our family. And I suspect she is matured and sharp enough to understand that the same is expected of her.
What would you say, is it an uneasy place for the labor sector in this country?
I think it's not an uneasy place for labor, because you know, there are all the permutations about the role of labor in the country. Labor has always been, certainly in my adult life, been given the kind of respect that is necessary, both by the government and I believe by private sector organizations. I have led organizations where there have been, at one point, when I managed ICN, which is state media, I remember having to deal with 4 in-house trade unions. They were there. And so we understood the role of the trade union. And I think if people come to recognize that the trade union is as useful as the management team, you could begin to strike a happy balance that would allow for growth and development within any organization, and by extension, the country.
On that note, public servants has been calling out a lot on the minister, Jennifer Primus. Now she's stepping away from politics. What is your assessment of her as legal minister?
I think she has been a kind of absent minister, and that puts it in a nutshell. On all the major issues, she was absent, and by absent I mean you didn't hear from her.
Right.
Yeah.
The 2019-2020 fiscal budget just passed. It was read out in Parliament. Did you see any sort of growth?
There's a fundamental flaw with what we do in Trinidad and Tobago, and it's not peculiar to Mbert and the Minister of Finance and this party and this government. It has always been that way. The budget has by and large been an income and expenditure sheet. I believe the budget in a developing society must, as it were, point a direction on where you hope to take the country at the end of the fiscal year. Put another way, the budget should have a projection 5 years down the road. In 5 years down the road, based on the programs and policies that we are implementing in this budget, and the expenditure we are making in this budget, we will see the emergence of an IT nation. We'll see the emergence of a nation where independent craftsmen and women will have their goods and services exported and foreign exchange earned from it. Small things, but things that mean a lot. We have always focused on oil and gas. The reality, the oil and gas isn't there in their quantities, nor is it as easily accessible as it used to be. And so, where are you taking us? Where are you taking me? That, you know, I think Mariano Brown had a very interesting piece in The Guardian on Sunday, where he talked about the budget and the fact that you're spending money and earning less isn't in any way going to illustrate growth and opportunity. And that's the reality.
Mr. Lee Singh, you are aware, I know we're getting a little feedback from in front right now, right? You are aware that it's either you thief, he thief, she thief, you know, it's on both sides. How do you plan to restore, you know, dignity, honesty, integrity, and fair play into politics?
Well, I think if every political person do the right thing, do the correct thing, abide by the rules and regulations which govern the society, we won't have the problem about who thief and she thief. What is sad though is that the last, I would say, 8 elections have been fought on corruption and crime. And this election is being fought on corruption and crime. Which is to say, the last party was voted out of office because of corruption and crime. And this party will have to defend its reputation with corruption and crime.
There are other small parties as well. There's the MSJ, there's, you know, COP, there's PEP. Do you see leadership in these parties?
Well, each party has its leader. As to whether these leaders will be able to transcend the barriers and the boundaries that hold them into their groups is another question. I think we need a little more than we are getting by way of information and certainly the actions and behaviors of the leaders. We've got to do better. We've got to do a lot better in terms of how we see and act on matters. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where people are always second guessing you or doubting you. And that is where we have found ourselves with many of the minor political parties.
Would you say UNC is a strong opposition party?
Well, as strong as it could be. I think it should have been giving certainly a much better account of its time, its stewardship as the opposition. If I were to rate the UNC as an opposition on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, I would give it about a 6. And if I were to rate the government on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest in terms of its performance and what have you, I would give it a 5. And I will give it a 5 only because the place has not erupted into chaos and it has kept the wheels of the state rolling along. But when a society is in the kind of trouble that we are in terms of not knowing, of dwindling foreign exchange, of our inability to earn and to diversify and all of that, you know, you could really reduce that 5 to a 3. But I would leave it at that for this time being.
You know, there's a lot of crime taking place in the country. I don't know what is your assessment, you know, of the Commission of Police, but if you can shed some light on, you know, what should be put in place to sort of control the crime situation in this country?
That perhaps is the most important subject in the country today. As we walk in Port of Spain, to the west of Port of Spain, which is to say Woodbrook and environs on St. James, the major concern is crime. But the crime in these communities is about hold-ups. People, you buy a car and somebody hold you up with a gun, or somebody see you in your yard and they hold you up and things like that. But to the east, the issue is also crime, but it is about murder, death, and killings.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, how would you rate the Commissioner's performance?
I think the Commissioner is doing well. But I think the country has got to recognize that the Commissioner cannot fix crime. He can improve all the systems to administer over crime. But guns don't kill people. People kill people. And if it is that people kill people, then we are approaching the crime issue from the wrong perspective in terms of hoping that the Commissioner of Police with guns and what have you will solve the matter. That will deal with some of the problems.
Right.
But we really need to go back to doing people-centered things, and maybe this is why Port of Spain People's Movement is so important at this time, because we are talking about creating a humane society, a humane capital city. And if it is that you're going to deal with people issues, you have to understand that there are many 14-year-old girls having children. A girl cannot be a mother because she herself needs to speak to a mother. A 16-year-old boy cannot be a father. And so we've got to find ways to address these things. What kind of support mechanisms can we put in place to ensure that the girl who has a child at 14 years will not be making, as it were, another badge member for a gang? We've got to put in place after-school care centers, daycare centers. We have got to do adult literacy centers, because there are many people under 35 in this country who are functionally illiterate. They cannot read and write. We've also got to put in place computer literacy centers, because that's the new, computers are not about razzle-dazzle. I see the technology as a tool of communication. You follow? Many of the young people are communicating on the phone. As to whether they are using English to write or good language and what have you is not really the issue. The issue is that they're using it to communicate. And therefore, how can that technology become a tool for earning a livelihood? We've got to begin to put in innovation centers. And when we get one day we will get a government that will talk about these things, innovation centers. And in these innovation centers, we must do a range of things, cutting across art, culture, technology, so that we can lift our people out of the doldrums that we find ourselves in. We've got to move to compulsory national service. People say I ought not to say compulsory and just say national service. I will always say what I mean and mean what I say. I will never attempt to deceive people, say one thing and then go and do something else thereafter. Yeah. If you want me, you must take me as I am. And I'm saying to you, we must move to compulsory national service for people 15 to 25 years who are not gainfully employed in work or study programs. If you're not working and you're not studying, you've got to come into national service. But I also say to you that this country has spent billions on educating people in all kinds of disciplines. These people who have benefited we must be able to utilize their skills and their talents in developing the nation.
Yeah.
And so they too must find a way to do national service. For example, if you did history or you did one of the social sciences, you are a good candidate for teaching in national service and in teaching in after-school programs across the country. We all speak to the issue that there are some schools underperforming. The reason why they're underperforming is because they have no alumni and they have no, as it were, the support mechanisms to provide the after-school training and re-engineering that is necessary for you to win a scholarship. And we've got to move away from the thought about winning scholarships. We have got to focus on producing good citizens. So it's a whole milieu of things that must happen. Foremost in this country needs an officer college where we train people to be leaders. And when I say officer college, where we are able to draw from all walks of life, and these people must come to the officer college, depending on where they are in society. If you hope to be a permanent secretary, you've got to go to officer college. If you hope to be a senior officer in any of the disciplines where there's police, you've got to come to the officer college. Because in more ways than one, nobody's preparing anybody for leadership in this country. And this is why you're hearing all these, every time you're hearing about some confusion in some ministry, you ask people to carry out a simple assignment as an investigation into alleged wrongdoing by a minister, and 3 senior officers cannot come up with a proper analysis based on a thorough investigation. If you're doing a thorough investigation, it means speaking to the person who has been accused, as well as speaking to the person who has accused that person, and all others who may have had information about the infringement or the wrongdoing. We can't get a simple thing like that right. But you see, that serves some people.
Yeah.
And because it serves some people, the questions weren't asked when the report was written. To suggest to me, if I receive a report and I see no input from the person who has been accused, I will call that committee back together and say, before you all give me this report, I'm not accepting this report. Complete this report. And that is what leadership is all about.
It is.
Yeah.
Is the Minister of National Security doing a good job?
He's a lot of talk. Sometimes I don't know whether he is a military man or whether he's a minister. You often see him wearing semi-looking military clothing and things like that, cap. I mean, all of that is garbage. We're not living in Cuba or Venezuela or any one of these places. Not even Mr. Putin,
Yeah.
who knows about military thing, wears any military outfit.
How would you rate his performance? 10 being the highest, 1 is the lowest.
I think he could get about a 3. Stuart Young,
Yeah,
I'll give him 3.
3.
Yeah.
That's very low.
You think it should be lower?
I mean, it's rather low. I thought he was
All
going to get a 5 or a 6.
No, he's a 3.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the OWTU purchasing of the refinery, the Petrotrin refinery?
I have absolutely no problem with OWTU tendering, bidding, succeeding, and being awarded it. But I would want to know that that is not just political gymnastics by the government at this time, because the people of this country have taken a strong position on the fact of the closure of the refinery and the fact that so many people were sent home. When I heard about the challenges facing and confronting the refinery and the country, my thoughts were, is there a way we could sort out this problem without sending home people in these difficult times? And my position is that it is better you eat little and live long than you don't eat at all, which is what is happening now. Nobody's eating down there. And I wondered whether the government and the union could not have gotten together and proposed a 50% cut. Because 50%, with all your benefits remaining intact, places you certainly still in the higher echelons of earnings among workers in the country. But the government didn't do that. The government closed down the refinery. If the government now, based on the bidding, and as I understand it, OWT was the only bid that had any sense in it, and it was left standing alone, is given the refinery, then it is important that the state provides all the support to ensure that this thing works well. Will it mean that we'll end up spending the same savings that we have been gaining with its closure? I don't know. But I certainly hope that Mr. Roger will find the financiers to do the deal. I hope he will find the very best minds available to be able to help him to put together a management team. And I hope, this is the biggest concern, is that Mr. Roger and the trade union will come to understand that even though they are the shareholders, they must not interfere in the day-to-day management of the organization. If they don't do that, then it will be the same old story. It's better the government had it and they're wrangling with OWTO.
Mr. Lee Singh, I know you're probably aware of Mr. Duke's political party, PDP, that he launched on Sunday. What are your thoughts on Mr. Duke stepping down as president and venturing into politics?
Well, I think it's good. But the reality is that this thing about stepping down, I mean, we've had situations, particularly in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, where trade union leaders have in fact become prime ministers. And so there's nothing wrong with that. I wish him well. He started it a long time ago, and I think he's now about to make a quantum leap from that level of politics, which is to say House of Assembly politics, international politics, which is to say becoming member of Parliament. I don't know his plans, but I suspect he's probably going to take the House of Assembly Chief Secretary's position. And from there, you know, anything is possible. What concerns me is that I understand, and I did not hear it, where he is alleged to have said that he is going to secede from Trinidad. I think that is an ill-timed statement. I think it may have repercussions for him, negative repercussions for him. But then again, if Mr. Duke is like my good self, he's not given to giving you a 619. So that if he is planning to do that, I think he may have done the nation a service by declaring early in the game that this is his ultimate plan. Now, as his friend, I would say to him, Mr. Duke, don't give that consideration.
I hope he hears that loud and clear. I think we have someone on the line here, Mr. Lee Singh, that wants to speak with you. I'm not too sure if they're hearing the call right now. Hello? We have one of our viewers. Hello, good morning. Hello? I'm not sure they're hearing anything. I think we'll have to try him back. That's Mr. 𝒊𝒏𝒈. We're seeing trying to reach you here this morning. Mr. Lee Singh, on that note, as they sort out this issue, what do you think of the government's decision with the influx of Venezuelans working in this country for a year?
I think it is not a bad idea. But I think the government, as with most things with this government, they have mishandled things. You know, they never seem to be positions well thought out and well executed. And so there's always a confusion about everything.
Right.
The reality is this, that Venezuela is a stone's throw away from Trinidad. And Venezuela, therefore, Venezuelans are fleeing from their country. Because as bad as people may believe things are in Trinidad, this is still heaven next to the hell that is going on in Venezuela. Venezuela is a society where the country is on meltdown. And only a few people, namely the military and those people who support the government at a high echelons, are enjoying life or are living a life. The ordinary man in the street is not too far from our street dwellers. And so, as a neighbor nearby, we couldn't, as it were, when the people come here, just put them on boats and send them back, though that is now being done, and with good cause. But I think, had this thing been administered properly up front, we would not have had the kinds of anxieties that we have. I think, too, we had a responsibility to get the best from Venezuela. So we should have said, we only want doctors. We don't want no lawyers. We want doctors, dentists, engineers, entrepreneurs, things like that. We should have stipulated, as other countries, other major countries in the world do, what you want coming across your border. But because we didn't do that, we have been blessed, I don't know whether it's to say blessed, but we have been visited by all kinds of Venezuelans who may not be in the best interest of Trinidad and Tobago. Because, as you know, based on the newspapers, I don't have the facts, I'm not sitting at the National Security Council. But based on the information that I read in the news, it appears that we have gotten a fair number of gangsters coming to Trinidad. That we should have resisted from day one. And we certainly took too long to close the loopholes in our very porous borders. There are things we could have done. But bear in mind, we have situations where even the police seem to be involved in something or one time or another. I remember, and I'm waiting to hear the outcome of it, where the two police officers who had no locus standi in that jurisdiction drove a police car onto the beach, and the car was swept away.
I remember that.
Now, all these things you don't hear about. What happened to these two police officers? What happened to the vehicle? Did they retrieve the vehicle? I don't know. And my own feeling is that all these things were happening, and that brilliant, you tell me why I gave him a treat? What was this brilliant Minister of National Security doing? This is not how you do national security. That's
true. I know you mentioned earlier on that your good friend Jack Warner, he's returning into politics. How do you feel about that?
I think Mr. Warner has a lot to offer this country. And I remember saying, after Peter Minshall's puppets were displayed at the North Coast Jazz, I wrote a post that we woke up that Sunday after the jazz, and there was a consensus that we ain't done with Peter Minshall yet. And I'm happy to hear that Peter Minshall is bringing a band in next year's carnival.
That's very nice.
I feel the same way about Jack Warner. I don't think this country done with Jack Warner yet. And my own feeling is that if he can put it together, he may gain much more traction than he did on the last occasion, if only because people have had an opportunity to think about his contributions, to think about his capacity to do work. He's not a person who feels he has all the ideas. If you give him an idea and it makes sense, he says, Palos, I like that idea. And that is the kind of person. When we did the traffic plan in St. James, it wasn't a leasing traffic plan, It was a traffic plan that I did in concert with Mr. Warner, who was the Minister of Works at the time, and his traffic engineers. So we didn't wake up and decide we're doing this thing. It took us a couple months before we certainly launched it. And even though we launched the trial period, there was still a number of things to be done to ensure that all the needs of all the users and stakeholders were satisfied. They never gave us a chance to do that work.
We're going to just take a short break and come right back and try to get back Mr. 𝒑𝒐𝒈. He was trying to call us to speak with Mr. Lee Singh here, so we're going to take a short break and come right back.
In Port of Spain, some of the things you are complaining about now happened under your term. For instance, latrine eradication in Laventille. A lot of the people in Laventille still using latrine rather than they will hook up to wasa. Outhouse. That is one issue that people are talking about. I myself, when I was working with the UNC, and Annabelle Davis was the chairman of the corporation, the corporation in Port of Spain. That was a big discussion, and I worked alongside of her to assist with that. That's just one of the issues. Another issue is the big pond, that whenever rainfall, Port of Spain is underwater, and that happened under your watch. And I say, what of you to you? What did you do as the mayor of Port of Spain to eliminate that still niggling problem that we still have up to today? And there are a lot of other questions that people will ask. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that should be a deciding factor whether people should vote for you or not, because I believe that you are talking a lot of nation-building initiatives on that platform this morning. You're sounding real good, and you're sounding like a person who could make a political difference for this country. But you know, the naysayers are going to ask these questions, and how do you plan to respond to that and handle these ills when you get into office?
Okay, 𝒑𝒐𝒈,
Yeah.
I want to thank you for the two questions. But clearly, you would have come in late into the program because I dealt extensively with flooding.
You're
and the
breaking up,
challenge.
and I'm not hearing it. It's unfair to me. It's unfair to me that I'm not hearing your response. You are breaking up. So I'm not hearing you clearly at all.
Okay, testing 1, 2. Are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you now.
Okay. I said to you, I want to thank you for the questions, but it is unfortunate that these questions are being asked because I dealt with the issue of flooding extensively earlier in the program. But with respect to the latrine eradication program, I'm really, really happy that you raised that because it constitutes a major plank of our 13-point plan for the city. The issue of the complete eradication of latrine pits in the city. Let me say to you, the issue of latrine pits only surfaced when I went to local government in 2010. Before that, it was not an issue. When I got there and I found out that there were 3,000 latrine pits in the city, I took the decision that it would be an item that I would not only agenda, but that I would prosecute. And having done that, I caused the then central government to make allocations available. In the first year, I requested $54 million to remove all the latrine pits. But not only did I remove the latrine pits, but I wanted to put in an 8x8 structure which contained a shower, a WC, and a face basin. And as far as humanly possible, ensure that it was plugged in to the underground sewer system. By the time I left office in 2013, we had begun the process, and it was a process that was being handled for us by the East Port of Spain Development Company, largely because the Port of Spain Corporation did not have the resources to treat with all those removals of all those latrine pits. My own position is that I would have hoped by now all 3 latrine pits would have been removed. That is not now the case. And so it appears that as we go back into office, and I'm hoping that the people of the city recognizes that the time has come to move this party that has been there for 60 years and to give the Port of Spain People's Movement the opportunity to really breathe new life and new air and freshness and sanitary conditions across the city. That when we go back, I had hoped by then all those pits would have been gone. But what has happened, we are still going to meet thousands of latrine pits. I didn't say thousand, thousands of latrine pits in the city. And it is our intention that we are going to eradicate it once and for all. And at that point, we are then going to say to everybody, we are going to put up signs in all these communities, no latrine pits allowed. And if somebody were to dig a latrine pit, we will not only find them, but we will close it down.
Mr. Lee Singh, one good thing about this discussion this morning that came out, and I hope people listening, you were the person who initiated the latrine pit, the eradication of the latrine pit movement. And I say to the people of Port of Spain, vote to your benefit and not to your demise. People in this country, especially on the East-West corridor, love to vote to the demise and not their benefit. We have to educate the public, and we have to get buy-in from them, and they have to believe in what you are saying to them before you could even move them from the comfort zone of voting. So, I applaud you. Not much people will do what you do in this country. Not much people have the testicular fortitude to stand up against a powerhouse such as the PNM to say enough is enough. But, sometimes, and that move you make, how much enemies you will make and how much friends you will make and how much people will believe that you could be you and your party that you now lead could be of benefit to this country. So I want to say congratulations for taking that quantum leap and bold step into the arena. And I want to wish you success going forward. As you're aware, people in Trinidad vote with their emotions, and they don't vote for the future of the country. So I think that if you are aware of these things, you will know how to handle these challenges going forward. I saw only over the weekend, 𝑺𝒊𝒏𝒈 energized the whole of Tobago. Tobago is on a high right now via 𝑺𝒊𝒏𝒈. I look at that over the weekend and I say, the world is changing. I looked at what happened in Chile, and I see how the poor is rising up against government. I look around the world, and I see how people are rising up against the deceit, the misappropriation, and the undermining of the people by the politician. I look at all these things, and I'm listening to your discourse, your conversation, and you sounding like you are for the people. It is now for the people to buy into what you are saying to them. And Mr. Duke alike.
You know, Boxer, people believe what they want to believe. People say what they want to say. But at the end of the day, you have a responsibility to be true to yourself and to be true to the people that you wish to serve. If I cannot be true to myself, then I would not be here this morning. And I think we've got to find a way to encourage all people who wish to serve to understand that that is the #1 priority.
Thank you so much, Boxer. Thanks for taking the call with us this morning. Boxer?
You're breaking up again, eh?
Right. I just want to tell you thanks for calling in this morning to speak with Mr. Lee Singh, because we're pressed on time this morning.
You all are breaking up terrible. I'm not hearing you all. You're coming over scratchy.
That's all.
So I don't know if I have said enough, but are you hearing me? I said that the call is breaking up and I'm not feeling like if I'm doing.
So, Mr. Leasing, I know we're coming to the end of this morning's interview. I just want to ask you one more question. Where do you see Trinidad and Tobago in the year 2020 after general elections?
Well, I would hope that in 2020, after the general elections, that Trinidad and Tobago would have found the capacity to put into office a government that will, or rather, I wouldn't say a government, to put in place a parliament from which we will find a government that will take the challenges of the country seriously, that will not be primarily concerned about getting another term, that would be moved to do the things that matter most, which is to say, address the fundamentals. I said to you earlier on that when I walk in West Port of Spain, the issue is crime.
Yeah.
When I walk in East Port of Spain, the issue is crime, also jobs. So the issue is, how do we address these fundamentals without, as it were, dropping bombs and blowing up the place? How can we find the brilliance, the ideas, the plans, the innovativeness, the creativity? When I think about East Port of Spain being the place that invented the steel band, now people take that, you see, because we grew up on it and because it is here, we take it for granted.
Yeah.
But when you look at the steel band and you hear it and you listen to it, you understand the tremendous technology that it is. If East Port of Spain could invent that, it means that there are patents waiting to be registered coming out of East Port of Spain. The question is, why haven't we proceeded in that direction? And it is simple. Successive governments have not treated with the needs and wants and the desires of the people of East Port of Spain in consultation with them. We sit down and we plan, well, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing that. But there's never, as it were, a meeting with the people who are being affected to say to them, this is what we want to do. What are your thoughts? Do you have a better plan? I want to say to you that during those 24 town meetings we had in East Port of Spain, while I served as mayor, I learned a lot from the people of East Port of Spain. And I grew to understand what was primary, what was important to them. And on the basis of that, we were able to fashion plans and programs. For example, people were concerned about these huge metal dumpsters all over the city. You used to see them?
Yeah, yeah.
And when you think about it, the people who lived in proximity to those dumpsters were being, as it were, punished because there were rodents, roaches, ants, mosquitoes, but most of all the stench that went for miles away. What did we do? Particularly in inaccessible areas, we recruited contractors from each district. For you to tender, you had to be from the district. And when you won the contract, the criteria had to be that you had to employ people from the district. So at the town meetings, we would roll out to people and say to them, this is how we are responding to what you raised earlier on about garbage collection. And we moved back to door-to-door collection of garbage. I'm saying to you, we have taken the people in this country for fools too long. And this country is in a good position. We are lucky that the people in this country have not risen up in arms against the state, have not risen up in mass demonstrations against the state. Because when people start to march, make no bones about it, you cannot stop them unless you are prepared to shoot them down. And if you shoot them down, ultimately you will be swept out of office. So that having been said, I want to say to you, I think 2020 ought to see a new parliament, a new kind of parliament we might have, with all these people springing up all over the country, and I'm not saying it in a negative or derogatory sense, but all the people who are fashioning political instruments across the city, we may well find some of them in the parliament. And so the issue is, Trinidad and Tobago will be forced to confront the issue of coalition governments. But such governments will truly bring to bear the best for the country, because this thing where two dominant parties are in the parliament, so it's like in and out the dusty bluebell. 1 minute is the dusty bluebell, and then the next minute the dusty bluebell out. We can't continue that way.
That's true. Thank you so much, Mr. Leesing. It was a pleasure having you here in studio with us this morning. I mean, you're welcome to come again, and with your party, I wish you all the success with the Port of Spain People's Movement. So we've come to the end of today's program with Mr. Louis Leesing, who's a former mayor. So you're going to look out for him. He's going to be all over the news, I'm sure, with your party. So I look for good things with you.
Well, we try.
So we've come to the end of PSA TV here, and we've come to the end of Questions with Avellon. So see you guys tomorrow, please God. You can join us with a conference with Mr. 𝑳𝒐𝒖𝒊𝒔. It's going to be airing at 10:30 today. You can also view it on our PSA page right here. Thanks so much.